And welcome. Yes, you are listening to Three Women. I am your host, Sherry DeNovo. I'm the MPP for Parkdale High Park. And we again have some pretty bright sparks, both in the studio and on the phone. We've got Antonia Zerbisias, an award-winning Canadian journalist, columnist, TV host for the Toronto Star, a CBC producer and reporter, and currently the Canadian political columnist. And we've got Vicky Mochama, national columnist for Metro, where she writes about race politics and all other things that just make her angry. And she's not going to sit still about it. She was with Canadaland before, so welcome to Three Women, Vicky.
Thanks so much.
So let's start with you, and let's talk about what's on every woman's mind across the world right about now, and that is Mr. T, Donald Trump's comment to Hillary towards the end of this last debate when he called her a nasty woman. So you heard that comment. Every woman's heard that comment. What did you think when that moment happened?
I think that moment was so indicative of how disrespectful that particular man is to women, but also just how indicative politics has been to women for such a long time. You know, such a nasty woman is, you know, the kind of insult women who were trying to get the vote in the 1920s were hearing about asking for their basic right to vote, and to still be hearing about it over 100 years later is terribly upsetting. And this whole campaign has felt so personal and personally directed at women. It's incredibly upsetting.
Antonia, you are you're a woman who've gone after a man like Donald Trump, and here we have
not
one.
Really.
Well, here we have one. Within spitting distance of the White House. We hope he never gets there. But so tell me, when you heard you're a nasty woman, what came up for you?
I was sitting with a bunch of. We're now calling ourselves nasty women. There were four of us watching the debate together, and we all threw our popcorn at the television. But, nothing surprised me at that point. And, in fact, I thought he was remarkably restrained.
For him, for
yeah,
sure.
I was tweeting things like, the cold meds are still working. And then at a certain point I went, the cold meds have worked, stopped working. And then, I just sniffed. and then when he made that remark, it was like, oh, you've got nothing left. If that's what you resort to, you've got nothing left. And when I'm going to say this about men, but women can do similar things to men. When you start calling names, I mean, you're intellectually empty. You're out of ammunition.
Mm-hmm. And this has been one ride of a campaign. I think of John Oliver's comment on his show this week tonight when he said, I thought we'd hit bottom with this campaign, and now bottom is looking way, way, way high above us. It's phenomenal to the point that, I've been seeing sort of conspiracy theorists on social media say maybe this was how the Democrats wanted it. This is going to give them the majority they've been looking at. I mean, again, looking at this election campaign as a whole, Antonia, lessons?
As Oliver said, that you just never know how low you can go. And I think that this has, we thought things were really bad in the early 2000s, in the Bush era, and we were mocking him, everything from his fool me once, fool me twice, you'll never, all his foibles and errors and apparent stupidities, I guess, for lack of a better term. And now, it's not only dumb, but it's nasty. And it's not only nasty, but it is subverting the entire process when you have a guy saying, well, maybe I'll accept the results if I win. I watched the Michael Moore, suddenly released a documentary, which is basically a one-man stage show, like a comedy, gig. He did this. It was released last week in New York City, and it's available on iTunes. And I'm not pitching it. I'm just saying that he made some very good points. And he pointed out that what Trump is doing is giving that 19% of white men who have been disenfranchised to a large extent by their jobs disappearing, their unions disintegrating, their wives or, women in their lives making more than them and having better jobs, or, being outbeat in colleges by women, more students are women than men, that kind of thing. It's their last gasp, and he made these grunting noises, which I won't make here on the radio because they're just too gross to be reproduced. And he said that's the last gasp of a dinosaur. And then he went on to say that he's afraid that what the vote for Trump is, and I'm going to say, well, he used the word, but he basically said it was a great big F-U to the system, and he held up his middle finger. And I think he's right. These guys who are supporting Trump, who, are getting behind his campaign, they have no other outlet to express their very real frustration with everything that has changed in the past couple of generations, whether it's women's place in the world or the total sort of disintegration of the middle class. And they get one vote, and that vote they will do with their middle finger. The problem is that, you may feel good about it on the day that you pull, the trigger or whatever it is that they do in American voting booths, but what do you do the next day?
We're, by the way, three women. If you've just tuned in, your host, Sherry DeNovo. I'm here with Antonia Zerbisias, Vicky Mochama, journalists both. And we're, of course, talking about the issues of the day. If you want to weigh in, we always welcome you. You can phone in at 416-946-7000. You can tweet at me, and I will reproduce your voice on air at Sherry DeNovo. That's CHERIDINOVO. Vicky, to you for a minute. When we're looking at the not-so-veiled threat that Trump made towards the end of that debate when he talked about, well, maybe I'll accept the results, and maybe I won't, is basically what he said. This, you got white militias in the hills in the States, and they're armed to the teeth. What comes to mind when you heard that?
I think the lesson that I'm taking from this is a thing that I'm trying to take to my work with me, which is that, some of the criticisms that people are saying about the media being too liberal and a little unfair when we're talking about working class communities, I think they're probably likely true, and they have been true. And if you can point back to all sorts of television shows that, make this community a punchline. And so I just think, actually, the one lesson that I really got out of it was I think we owe, Mitt Romney an apology. I think there's reasonable Republicans who, we swept aside with that dismissive tone that we tend to do. And I think, if you voted for Mitt Romney and you're working, a working class white male in America who's really struggling, and you see the liberal media sneer at this person who's supposed to be one of them and who's supposed to be understood in these communities, then, you realize that politics isn't for you anymore. And I kind of think we all have to take a step back and look at, in my work at least, or with the people I work, take a step back and see who it is we sometimes alienate with our words and our tone. And that's what I'm taking away from this. So, so the people arming themselves to the teeth in the hills, I'm absolutely concerned about them in the immediate sense. But in the broader sense, I'm concerned the tone we've taken to communities that aren't necessarily in our newsrooms, or people who tweet at us because they don't necessarily do that. They're being excluded and they're being alienated by the discourse.
Mm-hmm.
Sure,
go ahead,
agree
Antonia.
and disagree with Vicky?
Yep.
I agree that the media are, you didn't use the word, I don't think, but the media are elite. Journalists as a whole, anchors as a whole, television hosts as a whole are better educated and better paid than the average American or Canadian, for that matter. I won't pretend that I don't live a better lifestyle, and I was part of the 5%. I wasn't part of the 5%, not the 1%, but the 5%. So that's true. And it's also true that the media totally ignore the working class. I mean, I stretch back, and I was television columnist, for example, like as far back as in '89, and the only show I can remember really about the working class in that entire period was Roseanne. There weren't that many. Everybody else had nice houses, nice apartments. They had good jobs. They didn't as a whole represent that horrible expression, trailer trash, which is a real pejorative, and yet it was used all the time. And it was used, for example, with respect to, Sarah Palin and the constituency that she represented. So in that respect, I agree with Vicky, but I don't agree that the media are liberal, although they are definitely on Hillary's side right now. But I don't even feel that Hillary is overall liberal. I was a Bernie supporter to the extent that a Canadian can be supportive of an American candidate. She is liberal on certain things, but not on everything. And she certainly seemed a lot more liberal in comparison to all the Republican candidates. But to call the media liberal, they're corporate. They're only interested in one thing, and that's profit. And they are responsible. And I'm not, actually, I'm going to change that. I'm not going to say that they were even responsible for creating the monster that Trump is in the past couple of years. They just were pandering to that instinct to get ratings. And anybody who spent any time in the past year or two just like glued to CNN, which seems to be almost everybody I know, I can't even stand the sound of Will Splitzer's brain. He sounds like a donkey to me, and he sounded that way since I had to watch all the coverage of the attack on Iraq. But all these people who are always going on, you go out for dinner or, you go to the gym or something, did you see? Did you hear? No. If you tuned into it, you're responsible as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead, Vicky.
I think, absolutely, the audience bears some responsibility, but I think individual people who are working in media, and I mean, in the capacity that I get to see, which is a lot of newspaper industry people, they are liberal in private. They will tell you, they will talk about things with a liberal approach to them. And so I think we can't forget that behind all of this, there are individuals who inform these systems. And so, yes, there is a corporate dynamic happening, but the actual coverage of it and how we choose to talk about things tends to come from a fairly liberal standpoint.
For some, and I think I'll come down somewhere in the middle there. I mean, there's no question mainstream media is there to make some money. They're not doing such a good job at it these days. They're getting a lot of run for their money online. But
that just proves how not liberal they are, because where are all the viewers and all the readers going? Most of them are going to very liberal and very progressive alternative media online.
Well, that's true, but some of them are also going to some pretty scary sites and some pretty scary, unsubstantiated, conspiracy stuff online as well, which is clearly, part of the constituency of Donald Trump. I mean, he's speaking to, and trust me, I only hear about these people on my dog's Facebook site, because I can tell you, I keep my dog's Facebook site there, not only because I like my dog and other dog owners, but because there are a whole lot of dog people that are absolutely the polar opposite of who I am in terms of their political views. And some of it's really scary, and that informs the Donald Trump of the world. Let's move a little north of the border for a minute.
Sorry, Sherry, can I just stop you? I spent a month in Florida in February, and I spent a month in Vermont in April. And in both places, I found, and I will pivot, I'll help you pivot to north of the border,
no problem.
At the end of this. And I spent a lot of time with people you would consider well-educated and certainly very, 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 very comfortable. And there were a number of Trump supporters among them. People like, you would be shocked to hear them support Trump, because you would say, I don't get it. You're a lawyer. You live in Rhode Island. You have a mansion. Why are you like this?
Is it possible that they are white?
Oh, of course they're white.
I mean, that would be, that's how
But
I would
I'm
understand
white
that.
too.
Oh, you're white? I'm not that surprised. You're a Trump supporter. Like,
but you know
he's
what?
advocating for your cause quite a lot.
Well, yes and no. But now they're all supporting Hillary because they find much more to identify with. And here's where I pivot. They would all ask me about Justin Trudeau, and isn't he adorable, and isn't he wonderful, and he greeted the Syrian refugees and blah, 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 and yada, yada. and I would say always wolf in sheep's clothing, very cute sheep's clothing.
Yeah, well, that's a good pivot, Antonia. Thank you for that. Just another story, and you're absolutely right. I mean, this is to the point that this is not just the white alienated working class, but I met again in a holiday in the States. A nurse and her lawyer husband who were Trump supporters. And she said one of the most terrifying lines that I've heard all year. And that was, she said, what we need in the States is a strong leader, someone like Putin. At which point the Canadian conservative and liberal who I was sitting with at the time, we all agreed and said, what? But yes, let us pivot. So north of the border, and Antonia, you said it, I mean, there have been a number of articles, and they're just starting to come out, of course, a year in since Trudeau's been in Ottawa. Again, popularity through the roof, unbelievably popular in the polls. Nobody's even close in the other two parties. But when you look at the policies, it's very similar to Harper. I mean, we're still selling arms to Saudi Arabia. We have the same...
And lied about it.
Yeah.
And lied about it. I mean, he uses Stéphane Dion as his sort of mouthpiece puppet stooge to take the fall for a number of things. And
Indigenous peoples failed to uphold the UN declaration, didn't come through with the money he promised, cutting AIDS funding by about 70% to frontline agencies, totally pro-pipeline, it seems. Climate change targets the same as Harper, but... he's a rock star. I mean, let's face it, he's a rock star everywhere he goes. What's that about?
I will say that it, people are saying, oh, because he's so good at the photo op and the selfie. But this is the most masterful image creation and maintenance campaign I have ever seen in the history of politics anywhere. And he's untouchable. And the people behind him know how to manipulate the social media and all the media and trot him out. And it sure helps that he's so cute and he can do all these stunts like boxing and one-armed, whatever, handstands. I don't even know what he's doing, all that yoga stuff. His Sophie Gregoire is right in there with him. And unfortunately, when I bring it up with people and I say, Harper Light, they go, oh, yeah, but at least he's not Harper. It's like the same thing south of the border. Well, at least Hillary's not Trump. Okay, but is that a good thing? I don't think so.
Vicky, weigh in.
Well, I think the difference is that Justin Trudeau has claimed a lot of things and asked a lot of different communities to support him to get into power. And so Indigenous people came through for him at the last election. Young people came through for him, as well as minority communities across the country came through for him, and as well as environmental groups. People who would have maybe gone NDP in previous elections really came through for the Liberals, and I think he's going to have an accountability problem come 2019, which is to say in his first year, he's already backed off of marijuana legislation. He has already stepped up to support quite a number of pipelines that environmental groups have asked repeatedly for Canada to step away from, and he's really not very close to anywhere when it comes to Indigenous issues. And so come 2019, come the election, it won't be about, Justin Trudeau versus anything but Harper. That won't be the question. It will be based on your record and your promises, what have you done? And at year one, I don't know, there's really not enough there. There's not enough to mount a social media campaign that would, that could run up against the fact that he's failed on quite a number of promises thus far.
Now, Climate 101, by the way, as we speak, they just arrested 75 young people on Parliament Hill for protesting Kinder Morgan just peacefully. It's quite a change from the nice Trudeau arresting 75 young people on Parliament Hill as we speak. I'm just looking at Twitter here. And somebody just tweeted at me about that. Okay, I don't normally shill for the Liberal Party, but I'm going to be the advocate here for a second and say I think maybe part of the appeal here is, first of all, there's the contrast between what's happening in the States, and we seem so happy in Canada, and we have this good-looking young prime minister who seems so hip. And there's this international image of we're back to the kinder, gentler nation. And although it's Harper light, at least it's light, and he's showing up to things, and he's shaking the right hands. He was in Pride, and when the first thing he did was, Bill C-16 about trans rights, and he's got the marker of marijuana, if not the action on it. So he's saying the right words, and I don't know. Maybe Vicky, you're right. Maybe this is all going to fade after about a year, but I don't know. I'm a little cynical.
I think he's just going to ride the wave right through to the next election. And Vicky, if you and I are still around, I will bet you they will ride the wave and win again.
I think that's entirely possible, and I just really hope that the groups of people he's asked to support him and who he has yet to really stand up for just hold him to account for his promises. I actually think one of the silliest things that he's done is, come out in full force and claim I'm a feminist. Well, he's dealing with an era of feminism that's, fairly, I don't know if aggressive is the right word, but really tries to, if you say you're a feminist, we're going to hold you accountable to those principles, because feminism isn't just some badge for my generation. It is, a series of political promises. So, you can't just say you're a feminist and not have pay equity in this country. Deliver on that, or otherwise we will find the next feminist prime minister. There's more people to run this country than one Justin Trudeau.
Or subsidize daycare, which I think is also extremely important, and not selling arms to a regime, an apartheid regime, because what else is Saudi Arabia but an apartheid regime if women are completely, not even second class, 10th class citizens. Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about young people. Vicky, you're young. Certainly in comparison,
you're young.
In comparison to Antonia and I, you're young.
We're old.
So another headline from the moment is Morneau at the Liberal gathering talking about the job churn. That's the first term I've heard. Anyway, precarious employment. Basically, he says for young people, too bad, so sad. It's here to stay. Contract, temporary. This is your future, and get over it. Learn to live with it. Nothing we can do. Mm-hmm. What's your reaction as a young person to that?
I think my reaction is going to deviate from what I've heard from friends and coworkers, which is I'm just kind of refreshed by the honesty of it, because that has been my working condition for the last 6 years up until this week where I started a real full-time job. That's been the reality since I left school and for a lot of my friends. And it's nice to hear the government say with some honesty, I think we need to prep our people for that reality, because it has been the reality and very few governments have addressed it. Now, how they actually do that, I'm very interested to see, and I'll see if it, actually, applies to any of my friends in their working lives. But I think this is actually refreshingly honest. I think it probably goes against some of the promises that they've made, but I think Bill Morneau's a math guy, and I think he's done the math and said this is the reality.
He's a rich guy. He's a multimillionaire born to wealth.
And I really hope he divides some of that to us young people. But, I think that's what I took out of it, was he's probably off message with that, but I think it's honest.
Antonia.
All I can say is, and if I didn't quite catch all of what Vicky said, is that it's pretty hard to take a trust fund kid seriously when he just basically tosses off an entire generation, especially after making so many promises and getting them to support him in the election.
It is true that they did make some promises about youth employment. I mean, this was a huge part of what propelled him into power, his youthfulness. But
I think what he said was we need to prepare people for the reality of job churn, which is that precarious employment is really going to be a part of the coming reality for the next couple of decades. And I don't think we've really heard that. Economists will express that and say that that's true, but I think on a policy level, we haven't really heard that. And I'm just curious to know what they mean by preparing people. Does that mean, expansions to EI for people who are, say creatives who work in an industry where it is defined by the precarity of the employment? That would be interesting to hear. We haven't actually heard what the policy solutions are, but to hear someone who's responsible for policy take something that economists have been saying and actually say it out loud is, to me, refreshing.
Yeah, I'm not as fatalistic as you seem to be, Vicky, and I think it's kind of funny giving the age disparity. But I remember, and I know Sherry probably does as well, when Pierre Trudeau was faced with the huge amount of baby boomers coming out onto the job market in the 70s, talk about a problem in terms of making sure everybody was employed. So what they did was they created, or what Trudeau did, or the Trudeau government did, was created two kinds of huge programs: the OFY grants, the Opportunities for Youth grants, and the LIP grants, the Local Initiative Projects grants. Do you remember those, Sherry?
I do.
People could start up, say, women's crisis centers, women's rights centers, all kinds of community-based organizations, grassroots organizations, where they could get experience and get stuff on their resume and learn things, and then take that into the job world. They would also have money to spend, which they poured into the economy, whether it was, buying furniture for their apartments or whatever, clothing, and it really made a huge difference. But I don't hear Trudeau talking about that kind of solution. And everybody knows, every economist with a foot in the reality world knows that if you spend more money, like if the government spends more money and puts more money into programs for people, those people will turn around and spend the money in the economy. But I don't hear him doing that.
I mean, a very simple solution truly is just, if you talked about it, Vicky, equal pay for equal work, not just in terms of genders, but also in terms of contract, temp, and full-time. I mean, if an employer, it costs you as much per hour to hire a temporary or contract person, and you have to pay them benefits the same way that you do your full-time staff, it becomes less desirable to have temporary people on because it's a hassle. And they're very simple employment standard changes that could be made. They could be made provincially. They could be made federally. I mean, there are some solutions. So I guess what I feel is that it would have been nice to have heard, if he's going to tell us, yeah, this is the situation, but he's in part responsible for that situation now. He needs to also give us some solutions as well. We're going to take a few minutes break, pay some bills, listen to a tune. And by the way, just to let you know, if you just tuned in, you're listening to Three Women with Antonia Zerbisias, Vicky Mochama, and yours truly, Sherry DeNovo. Back in a flash.
I'm no Right here, right now, every day. CIUT 89.5, Toronto. Sound of your city.
And we are back. We three nasty women here on CIUT 89.5 FM. We've got Antonia Zerbisias, we've got Vicky Mochama in studio, and yours truly, Sherry DeNovo. We were talking about Trudeau before we left. Just wanted to do one last little talk about this side of the border and, of course, his first year in office, and that the promise of electoral reform. I know that there were many, many people in my constituency who thought, well, if there's one good thing we'll get out of this year, it will be a move towards more democracy in this country. Vicky, electoral reform, are we going to get it from Trudeau? What do you think? Predictions?
I don't really know how to predict because we don't have the report from the committee, and that's not coming till December 1st, and the minister is just wrapping up her tour. So we'll see. Like, if they're saying that there's no more excitement about it, there's no more energy for it, how are they making that conclusion? We don't have a report. We don't have any information. So I'm hoping we still get some form of electoral reform. I think it's worth talking about, and I think whether or not people are excited about it, I think it's still entirely necessary to our electoral system. And I think Justin Trudeau's comments that, people are no longer excited because they love this government. That sounds so craven, but I think in a way he's right. People were really excited about electoral reform when it was about getting out the Conservatives, and I haven't heard about it since. And I talk to political people all the time, and they don't talk about that anymore. That's no longer on their top priorities. And so I think we'll get it in some capacity, not as quickly as people thought we'd get it.
Antonia.
I agree with Vicky, and I would like to add, as a kind of sort of sidebar but relevant to electoral reform in general, is, for Mr. because it's 2015, the Candidate Gender Equity Act, I think it was called Bill C-237 last week, which would have amended the Canadian Elections Act to make for a more gender parity in the number of female candidates as opposed to male candidates that are put forward by individual parties. But, the Liberal Party did not support that. So, it's kind of hard to say, yeah, they're progressive, yes, they're for changing the system, and yeah, they're for seeing women get equal rights when those kinds of things happen. I'm not saying that the bill was perfect, but it was certainly worth exploring.
Okay, so there's a little bit of a local story just happened. We had a 19-year-old in Niagara West Glanbrook elected, which is or nominated for the Progressive Conservative Party, which is unusual. If he were elected, and this is a very conservative riding, he would be the youngest ever in the provincial government, and he's pretty young, 19.
Is he even allowed to go into any of the casinos in Niagara Falls?
Good question. Good question. I don't know. What is the age for casinos? Is it 19 or 18 or 21?
I believe it's 19. I think it goes
so
along with our
so
drinking
there
age.
he can go into the casino. But here's the kicker. The kids, he's not just a progressive conservative, he's a social conservative. One of his platforms was about sex ed. He's against having sex ed taught in the schools and thinks that this is the purview of parents. What I just said it on News Talk this morning, but I said, I'll give him 6 months at Queen's Park and we'll have him dancing in the gay bars on Church Street. But really, what do we think about this? Antonia, is this a new wave? Or actually, we should start with you. You're the young person, Vicky. Let's talk with you. Are you noticing among people who are young a new kind of wave of social conservatism? Say it ain't so.
No, this is to me, this is remarkable. Like, to me, this is one of those things where it's like, oh, you're 19 and you believe that parents should be responsible for sex education. Based on what life experience? I think we all believe. We all believe.
Now, don't be ageist.
I'm not being ageist, but I just think a first-year university student probably hasn't spent that much time with parents who are have kids in school. That's just my theory about that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he spends quite a lot of time doing that. But I'm blown away by it. But I do think his presence in the party is just I guess it's a wonderful corrective to the idea that young people don't care about politics and that we're not involved. And I think this shows that we're involved across all ideologies, and I think that's so important to have.
Antonia, 19-year-old social
Well, I'm not
conservative.
entirely sure that he's just limited because I looked at the website when I knew we were going to talk about him today, and I looked at what he stands for, and I'm not even entirely sure that he's just for sex education by parents, but I had this sort of the whiff of home education. Period. You can educate your kids at home and don't let them be exposed to anything out there because God forbid they may see a person who's not the same color or the same religion or the same sexual orientation as you are, and that's kind of frustrating and frightening. However, I chalk it up more to kind of a sort of a protest vote more than anything, and I don't really take or an apathy vote. I don't take it very seriously, and even if he does make it to Queen's Park, I mean, I doubt very much he's going to show the stuff that he needs to show. And by the way, I take issue with the fact that young people are not interested in politics. I think they're very much so. I know that they work at the grassroots level a lot, volunteering for local candidates and that kind of thing. But they don't have the backing to go all the way. And I'm curious to know who backed this guy. When he gets the approval of organizations like LifeSite News, which is very anti-LGBT rights and anti-choice, then I got to scratch my head.
Now, he has, to be fair, said that the anti-abortion folk who showed up in droves at his nomination, that he's not with them, that they don't represent him. So we have a glimmer of hope there. Interesting by-election, though, because the New Democrats down there, to be fair, have nominated a policeman, a retired policeman. So I can tell you on social media, a lot of the left is pretty shocked about that. Again, what do you think? New Democrats have an old policeman, and the Conservatives have a 19-year-old.
We have Bill Blair in charge of marijuana policy, right, on the federal level, so why not?
Vicky.
Yeah, I guess, apparently Niagara West Glanbrook is this unpredictable Wild West of politics where a 19-year-old is leading social conservative policy and a police officer is leading leftist socialist policy.
It'll be a very, very interesting. And then we have the other one is Ottawa Vanier, which is we have Andre Morin, who's running for the Conservatives, a former ombudsperson for Ontario, and wow, that was a shocker to me, I have to say, because I was a fan of Andre when he was not as a person necessarily. Apparently, he wasn't the best employer, but I mean, he did do some pretty solid investigative research when he was at Queen's Park. Any thoughts on that, Antonia?
Can I bow out of that one?
You can bow out of that one, but they're two interesting by-elections, only because of the people involved, for sure. Okay,
well,
so
if you know what, the by-election, I will say this, that in terms of by-elections, that I think that if anything is going to, the dislike of the current premier is going to really figure very much so in any by-elections coming up.
And that's an interesting point. So let's talk about Kathleen Wynne for a minute. Here's a woman who was riding top of the polls. And actually, it was kind of a Trudeau-esque moment when she was elected, and she certainly swept through the GTA. And out lesbian, first out lesbian premier. It is a historic moment. And now, a couple of years in, maybe a year and a half before the next election, she's the least liked premier in our history. What happened? Antonia?
I think there's a lot of factors. Let's not discount the whole sort of hydro thing, for example. I think there have been some very, very smart campaigns, that sort of present themselves as being grassroots, with fancy websites and stuff, that, she's going to raise hydro rates 2,000%, or something to that effect, on one, or gas rates, 5 million %. There was another whole thing that made it seem like this was for real, or, the whole sex education thing, when we would find out later that it was all sponsored by the Ontario Conservatives. So, there's been, a lot of concerted, propaganda against her. But at the same time, she has not delivered on a lot of things that, not that she promised a lot of things, but we attributed a lot of things to her based on the fact that she was an out lesbian, seemingly progressive woman.
And she described herself as the social justice premier. And then, quite frankly, she goes and privatizes one of her largest assets, Hydro One. Vicky, what's happening there?
I'm not entirely sure. I know she's incredibly disliked. I just recall that there was a period where it seemed like at the last election that, the Conservatives were going to take this because people really dislike the Liberals. But what we forget is that Kathleen Wynne is an excellent campaigner. She brings coalitions together. People really like her in person. And so I think there's a possibility that she has a Trudeau-like effect of turning a bad press into good press. And so I'm just wondering at what point she'll start to put those actions into gear. So I understand that people really dislike her, and a lot of that is informed by quite a lot of conservative machinery in the background, but a lot of that is informed by valid reasons to dislike her. But I know that at a certain point we're a year and a half away from an election, and at a certain point she will flip into campaign mode, and campaign Kathleen Wynne is an incredibly likable person who sells policy very well.
And campaigns count, and we've certainly seen that. The Conservatives were going to win until they said they were going to fire 100,000 people. So, I mean, it counts what happens in them. And we saw, of course, in the federal campaign, people like Katie and Gerald and those the backroom strategists of Trudeau who, again, as Antonia, you've said, just they have a very smart they have a lot of war chests. First of all, they've got a lot of money, and second of all, they've got a very smart war room.
Here's my concern. I'm from Quebec, as you know, and there's an expression. I'll translate it. There's an expression in Quebec that if you're blue in Ottawa, you're red in Quebec City, and if you're blue in Quebec City, you're red in Ottawa. And what I'm thinking, is that because there's now a Liberal government that's very popular and seems to be there to stay in Ottawa, people will feel comfortable voting Conservative here, especially if they dislike Kathleen Wynne. That's it. I'm just throwing it out there.
Mm-hmm. And they've been in power for almost 15 years, so that's a
it's
significant run.
Throw the bums out kind of thing.
Yeah, whoever they are. We'll wait to see on that one. We're broadcasting from the University of Toronto, and it's made some news of its own in the last little while with the professor who refuses to use pronouns for trans students that they might request and others. It's an inordinate amount of press on this for this guy. There was a demonstration, got really nasty. I wasn't there, but I heard it was nasty on both sides probably, but certainly there were a lot of people who came out and attacked trans people. I heard from the trans people about it. Is this free speech? What is it, Vicky?
It is free speech. Yeah, he's entirely entitled to say what it is he wants to say. If he feels he doesn't want to use those pronouns and he doesn't feel that he likes what that means to our language, he is entitled to say that. What free speech works like is that the government can't stop him. If the University of Toronto chooses to diminish his work as a result, that's a thing that they're allowed to do. This is not... it gets a lot of state money, but it's essentially private. So they could do quite a lot with whatever it is with the staff that they have. So he has the right to say exactly what he wants. He can post it on YouTube and he can continue to talk to the press. He is exercising his freedom of speech. He cannot be upset that then people are thus upset about it and want him to either lose his job or to stop doing the work he gets to do. That's their freedom of speech on the other side too.
Antonia?
I completely agree with Vicky on this. I'm a big champion of trans rights, as you know, Sherry, and I will do anything I can to support them in this world and in this country. However, if he wants to say what he wants to say, as long as it isn't hate speech and criminal speech, then let him rip. I'm the kind of person who really believes that, especially in an academic environment, that he can say whatever he wants. Now, Vicky says that it's a private institution, but strictly speaking, it's because it receives so much government funding. It isn't totally it's like quasi-private, right?
That's fair, yeah.
Yeah, it's quasi-private, so it's a little complicated. But he should be able to. What I find interesting is how the right is seizing on this as a cudgel against trans rights. And they're going to run in the bathrooms and say you can only use the pronouns that that they want you to, and that bothers me. But they're right; it is a free speech issue, and I have to say I support him.
Yeah, I mean,
with regret.
Yeah, I think that the best response really is to call him she, her, and by a woman's name, and if you're a student of his, and go for it. Certainly on that score. Again, you're listening to Three Women. Just in case you tuned in, and we've got Antonia Zerbisias, longtime journalist, and Vicky Mochama, newer to the journalist field, but here we are, of course, as we usually do on Three Women, talking about all things current and in the news. And if you want to weigh in, always happy to hear from you. Thank you for your tweets at Sherry DiNovo, CHERIDINOVO. People are on Twitter all about what's happening at Parliament Hill with the Kinder Morgan arrest. 75, young people, Climate 101 they're called, who are there talking about basic pipelines, et cetera, et cetera. We were talking about Trudeau earlier. It probably makes sense to end talking about pipelines. I mean, this is something, when you remember about Keystone XL, this is something Obama came out against, that Hillary has been somewhat quiet, certainly about the situation in Dakota, where First Nations have really risen up to take their land back. And here we have Trudeau signing on to what's been called a carbon bomb on the West Coast. What do we think? Antonia, I'll start with you in terms of the American-Canadian reality here in Washington and Ottawa. Is Hillary going to cave to big oil, do you think? It seems like Trudeau's going that way.
There's no reason why she should. From what I understand, and my limited knowledge of the resource economy, there is no political reason why she should. The claim that it was going to create a lot of jobs was never true. That was disproven years ago. The risk to the environment is extremely high. And there's so many other forms of energy now available to Americans, no thanks to fracking, that they don't need to do it, especially since the KXL was basically just a conduit to the Gulf, so that they could ship the oil away from here. So it never made any sense, ever, except to TransCanada and to the Harperites, who wanted to prop up the tar sands
and to Rachel Notley and the Alberta government.
And well, there is that, but it doesn't make any sense. So there's no reason. But you asked me about Hillary. There's no reason for Hillary Clinton to give it the go-ahead.
She has been faulted, though, for not saying anything about the situation in Dakota. I mean, I'm talking to two journalists now. This is Amy Goodman of Democracy Now! Has been charged. I mean, I gather the charges have been dropped.
They were dropped last week. The judge just laughed them out of the courtroom, basically.
Yeah, but I mean, this is, and the footage that, then the mainstream media was running in the States came from Democracy Now!, amazingly enough. So somebody's covering it, and there was a little bit but no comment during the presidential race, which is disconcerting, of course, for those who are still being arrested down there. Mm-hmm.
I think it's a ticking time bomb, and I'm going to use the popcorn thing again. I'm putting on the popcorn because I have so much faith in First Nations of America to stand their ground, literally stand their ground, and stop. I mean, look at how, like Idle No More, and the push to put missing and murdered Indigenous women front and center politically. I mean, 5 years ago, nobody was talking about this, and now it's like right there on the political agenda. Look at the difference. The decisions on a couple of other pipelines, because First Nations people were not consulted to the proper extent. So I think that it's just going to get really interesting, and it's going to be, once the media turn their attention away from this election, then they're going to start noticing.
And Vicky, we've got Trudeau Liberal, Rachel Notley NDP, seeming to be on the same page about this. Alberta's saying, well, we got to get our oil to market.
Yeah, I think the economic situation in Alberta is undeniable, and I think that's a lot of what has propelled the decision making that you shouldn't really see coming from the left. Saying, sure, pipelines, just whatever we can get, whatever money we can get. But I do think the thing that we're missing out of the American election is that Clinton, who will likely win the presidency, hasn't been asked about climate change and hasn't really been asked about pipelines, and it's not really in her platform. So we're entering into a presidency with someone who hasn't really been held to account in any way on environmental or energy policy. And this is possibly one of the biggest issues for the next 50 to 100 years. And the next president, we don't really know where they stand on it. So we have that problem, and it's sitting right there, and she's going to start in office day one. And I wish it weren't the case, but Indigenous activists and environmental activists stand up with their bodies, but oil stands up with its money and its people, and the oil lobby in America is really difficult to get past.
That may be true, but you know what? The price of oil is so low that it doesn't make tar sands bitumen profitable to move right now. So
it's on the upswing, though. It's on the upswing.
I'm not holding my breath because there's a glut on the market.
And what strikes me as bizarre is why anybody would defend a kind of a one item economy anywhere anymore, whatever it is. And clearly in Alberta, where you've got so many jobs and so much of the economy resting on one industry, it seems to me the time, diversify.
Yeah, absolutely.
And quickly, because you need to. Any last thoughts? Antonia, you're semi-retired. You're not really retired. You're working like every other so-called retired person I know.
Right.
When you sit and you watch your television screen these days,
I don't. That's the whole thing. I'm not watching television.
Where's the hope? Let's end on a note of hope. Where's the hope you see in this world?
Well, okay, I'm going to go visit my stepson in Washington, D.C., and my sister in Virginia right after the election, and I hope I don't get shot. How's that?
I guess that's more positive than not. Vicky, where's the hope? You're young. You've got a life ahead of you. Where's the hope?
There's a Marvel movie coming out. No, I think there's plenty to be hopeful for. America's going to have its first female president, and I think that is an incredible thing to be a part of, and an incredible moment to have been a part of. I was looking into the history of women's right to vote, and it is horrific for the vast majority of it. So to get to this moment and to realize that women who are no longer alive really worked hard for this moment, I think that's so exciting, and I think that only means that the things we're working on now and the things we want to happen, we might not be around for them, but they'll happen.
Yeah, I always say I'm the first woman born in my family as a human person and not a thing. Because of the person's case, my mother was born before that person's case was solved. So I mean, that says something. And we're Canadian. Like, we didn't come from a developing country. We're Canadian. So
well, my mother, my mother was born in Canada, but she married a man born in Greece. She lost her Canadian citizenship and had to be naturalized because she married a non-Canadian. I mean, that's how bad it was for Canadian women.
It's unbelievable, really, how far we've come. So thank you for that, Vicky. Yes, there is that note of hope. But not to dash our thoughts, I just wanted to go out with the last tweet that was just tweeted at me, mainly and mostly. It's all good. But this chap tweeted at me about me. He said, "Yep, there the social Sherry Novo goes yet again. Now there's a nasty woman." So there you go.
Okay. Retweet that so I can see it. and I can get back to him. I control
Well,
as
he's
good as
actually he's
anybody
tagged
else.
you in. He's tagged you both in on that. So we're all by association nasty women, and I think
proud.
and proud of it.
You
And
ladies
I
can
want to
speak for
give a
yourself.
shout out to Lisa Duchok, who's our producer and behind the glass here in the control room. She's a nasty woman too. So really, what I'll say to all those nasty women from Three Women. You're not alone, sisters. You're not alone. And whatever happens in the next few weeks in the United States, I can tell you that 90% of women